Let me ask you a question. Have you ever felt like you're doing everything right and still not moving forward? I know I have. There was a season where I kept asking myself a question I just couldn't shake. Why do I feel stuck? I was working full-time as a web and mobile app developer. I was dealing with chronic pain. I was trying to build a coaching business, staying consistent with this podcast. I was trying to grow my faith, read my Bible, spend time with my friends. And honestly, it felt like I was grinding myself into the ground. What made it worse was that I thought I should be able to handle all of it. I kept thinking, maybe I need to work harder. Maybe I just need to be more disciplined. Or maybe I need to push through whatever this mental gymnastics I'm trying to do is. But eventually I realized something surprising. The problem wasn't my effort. The problem was that I never stopped long enough to understand what was actually happening. I was constantly moving, constantly doing, constantly consuming, but never reflecting. And that's what makes today's topic so important. Because one of the biggest lessons I've learned from John Maxwell's 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth is this. Learning to pause allows growth to catch up to you. Today, we're talking about the law of reflection. And if you've been feeling stuck, frustrated, directionless, or uncertain about what God is doing in this season of your life, this episode might be exactly what you need. I remember sitting at my desk about 3 years into my software development career. I had done everything I was supposed to do, everything society says we need to do. I went to college, got the degree, got the job, started building a career, and yet I remember sitting there and thinking, is this it? I didn't know exactly what was wrong. I just knew something felt off. Something felt unfinished. There was a restlessness I couldn't explain, and here's what's interesting. That wasn't the moment that changed my life. The moment it changed my life happened years later when I finally stopped long enough to reflect on why I felt that way in the first place. Because experience alone doesn't create wisdom. Reflection does. Experience isn't the best teacher. Evaluated experience is. Here's where this gets really important. Reflection isn't just about reviewing your day, it's about understanding who you're becoming. Because reflection reveals patterns. Patterns reveal beliefs. Beliefs shape identity. And identity determines the direction of your life. Think about that. If I constantly reflect and discover that fear is driving most of my decisions, I can confront that. If I discover that comparison is stealing my confidence, I can address that. If I discover that God has been opening the same door repeatedly, time and time again, and I've been ignoring it because I'm afraid, I can finally take action. Without reflection, those patterns stay hidden. The question isn't whether you're going to be shaped. The question is, what is shaping you right now? One of the principles John Maxwell teaches is in the 15 Valuable Laws of Growth is the law of reflection. He says, learning to pause allows growth to catch up to you. I love that. Because so many of us we're constantly moving to new projects, to new goals, new books, new podcasts, new responsibilities, new distractions. We're always chasing the next thing. Shiny object syndrome, anyone? But growth often happens when we stop to reflect. Reflection turns experience into insight, and insight creates wisdom. The question that generated the most discussion during one of our Pursuer Circle groups recently was this. Do you intentionally create space to reflect, or are you constantly moving? And honestly, The question exposed something in almost every person in the room. Almost every person admitted some version of the same thing. Like, I'm always go, go, go. I don't really stop. Or I move on before I process the experience I just had. Because most of us don't intentionally create a space to think. We react. We respond. We consume. But we rarely pause. If you're always moving, you'll never hear what God is trying to teach you. What happens when you never slow down long enough to process life? You repeat mistakes. You miss lessons. You stay confused longer than necessary. And you keep asking God for answers he already gave you. And you keep searching for clarity while ignoring the evidence sitting right in front of you. I think some men spend years praying for direction when God is waiting for them to reflect on the direction he's already been providing. God may have already shown you your next step. That's the thing. You just moved too fast to notice it. It's not too late to slow down. This is actually one of the reasons I created the Pursuer's Circle. Because most men don't need another course. They don't need another YouTube video. Ironic. They don't need another episode. Another podcast episode. What they need is space. Space to think. Space to process. Space to get honest. And space to reflect with other men who are serious about their growth. If you're in a season where you know God is calling you forward, but you're struggling to figure out what the next step is, I'd like to encourage you to check it out. It's a growth-focused community for Christian men who want more clarity, more intentionality, and stronger accountability on the pursuit of their calling and the goals God's put on their life. You can learn more at circle.pursuitofcalling.com. And that will also be in the description of the YouTube video and in the show notes. So how do we actually do this? For me, reflection isn't some complicated process. It's become a daily habit for me. Every morning during the week, at least 5 or 6 days during the week, I spend time preparing for my day ahead. Every evening, I spend time reflecting on how the day actually went. Pretty simple concept. Think about it like this. Preparation helps me live intentionally, and reflection helps me learn intentionally. And both matter. Because if all I do is prepare, I never learn from what happened. And if all I do is reflect, I will never apply what I learned. I found that growth happens in the tension between those two areas. The morning asks, what do I need to focus on today? The evening asks, what did today teach me? And honestly, that simple habit has exposed things about myself that I never would have noticed otherwise. For example, I've written down multiple times that one of my biggest distractions is social media on my phone. Not because somebody told me, not because I read it in a book, because reflection exposed the pattern. I kept seeing the same thing show up over and over again. I'd lose focus, lose time, get distracted, and eventually I had to confront the fact that it wasn't a random occurrence, it was a habit. Or I should say, just to be honest, it's still a habit I'm working on overcoming and eliminating from my life. Reflection exposed it, though. Brought it to light. So I started putting systems in place to make it harder for that distraction to control my day. More recently, reflection revealed something else. I wasn't paying close enough attention to my calendar. That sounds simple, but it had a real consequence. It actually just happened last week. I was prioritizing the wrong things. I was missing meetings, reacting instead of planning, feeling overwhelmed because I wasn't preparing properly for what the day was actually going to hold. Again, reflection exposed the pattern. And once I saw it, I could take responsibility for it. That's what reflection does. It helps you stop blaming circumstances and start identifying patterns. It helps you see what leads to growth and what leads to burnout. what leads to focus, and what leads to distraction, what leads to progress, and what keeps you stuck. And here's the good news. You don't need a complicated journaling system to start. You don't need 3 pages of notes. You don't need a fancy notebook. Start with 5 minutes a day. Or write 3 small sentences. Ask yourself, what did I learn today? What do I think about what happened? And what did I learn? That's enough. Because reflection isn't about writing more, it's about becoming more aware. And awareness is where growth begins. You can't change a pattern you refuse to notice. Reflection doesn't create your problems, it reveals them, it brings them to light. And what gets revealed can finally be changed. You know, the Apostle Paul didn't just teach reflection, he commanded it. He said, examine yourself to see whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves. That's 2 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 5. In Galatians chapter 6, verse 4, he says, each one should test his own work. And then 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 16, he says, pay close attention to your life and doctrine. Why? Because transformation doesn't begin with action, it begins with awareness. And awareness begins with reflection. In Scripture, reflection is never about overthinking. It's about letting God reveal what he wants to transform in you. And the first thing he transforms is rarely your circumstances. It's your identity. Because when identity shifts, direction shifts. When direction shifts, your calling becomes clearer. Some men spend years asking God for direction while ignoring the lesson he's already given them. So this week, I want to challenge you with 3 questions. Question 1, what lesson from the last 6 months have you still not processed and reflected on? Question 2, what keeps showing up in your life that God may be trying to teach you? And question 3, do you intentionally create space to reflect? Or are you constantly moving? Be honest. This is not about who you want to be. It's about who you actually are right now. Because awareness is where growth begins. You don't need more experiences. You need more wisdom from the experiences you've already had. Reflection is where God turns experience into insight. Insight into growth, and growth into the person he created you to become. Your calling isn't just discovered through action. It's also discovered through reflection. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Pursuit of Calling podcast. If this episode challenged you, share it with another man who is in a season of transition. And if you're ready to stop drifting and start growing intentionally, I'd love to invite you to apply for the Pursuer Circle at circle.pursuitofcalling.com. And guys, thank you again for listening to this episode. Until next time, keep pursuing your calling, do it well, pursue who God has created you to be, and I'll see you next time. Peace.